my plan during this session is to talk to you for about an hour and then open up the floor for discussion and questions and answers. So during this lecture, what I'd like to do is to share with you what I've learned about trying to both disrupt and transform mental health service systems to a recovery orientation. Just to summarize or recap from my earlier talk this morning, one of the areas in which I got really wounded in terms of the early days of my treatment was that my care team was relating to me more as an illness, more as a disease than a person. And I would go routinely to what at the time was called ambulatory care services. So I'd go to the outpatient clinic that was attached to the hospital where I sometimes was an inpatient. And I would get medication services. At first I would go every week, and then I would go every month. And when I would sit down to meet with my psychiatrist, I would say things like, I feel sedated. And my psychiatrist would say, yes, Ms. דיגן, yes, but you are not psychotic. And I would say, but even when I'm taking these medicines, I'm still hearing distressing voices. And he and my treatment team would say, yes, Ms. דיגן, but you're not shouting at your voices any longer. And I would say, I can't think very clearly on this dosage of medicine. And he would say to me, yes, Ms. דיגן, but when you take this medicine, you're not as thought disordered, right? And I would say, well, I feel like the meds are controlling me. And he would say, no, you're more in control when you take this medicine. And I would say, I'm not myself when I'm on this medicine. And the point of view of my treatment team was, yes, but Ms. דיגן, you have returned to baseline. So I hope that you can see visually here that there is a chasm, a gulf, right, between what my experience of care was and what my treatment team's opinion or perspective was. There literally is no common ground on which my treatment team and myself are standing. There's no agreement here on what the goal of care is. What is the goal of treatment? My treatment team is saying return to baseline is a great outcome. And I'm like, but I don't have a life. Is this the new baseline? Because it's not good. So there was no common ground. We were not standing together looking towards where treatment was trying to go, where treatment was trying to get me to. In fact, as I said in that earlier talk today, my care team was pleased with the outcome. From their perspective, these were bright and these were very compassionate, well-educated professionals. They weren't evil and they weren't mean, right? And from their perspective, they had done a good job, an excellent job, of stopping the progression of a chronic deteriorating disease they call schizophrenia. In my experience, my life had come to a screeching halt, and I was living in a state of despair because my future had been completely eclipsed, that all of the things that had mattered to me had gone away. I felt like a treatment failure. I felt like the outcome was disastrous for me personally. My treatment team was happy with the outcome, thinking it was good enough. It won't surprise you then to know that when I started my recovery and got back on my feet and went on to get my doctorate, one of the things I focused very carefully on is how to think and how to create tools so this didn't happen anymore. I wish this slide was ancient history and didn't happen anymore. I wish that routinely service providers, whether it be rehabilitation or clinical services, were to immediately, from day one of care, get on the same page with service users about how we want treatment to help us. But unfortunately, I fear that that doesn't always happen. And so I set about developing a lot of tools. And I call these tools the Common Ground program. And now you know a little bit about where that term common ground comes from. In this scenario, there's no common ground between me and my treatment team. In the vision that I have for a better service system, I imagine us finding not only the common ground of our shared humanity, but the common ground around where treatment is trying to lead in terms of the goal of care, the goal of treatment. And that it's not just the professionals who agree on the treatment goal, or that my family agree to the treatment goal, but that I also agree and help to establish what is the goal of treatment. Is this an acceptable outcome? And my experience was no, this is not the outcome that I want for my care. And so I call my approach Common Ground. And today I run my own small company. We're a company run by and for people with the lived experience of our own recovery. And we are doing, I think, extraordinary things in and through this very small company in our creation and proliferation of the Common Ground program. And today, what I want to do in the next few minutes is to give you a whirlwind tour of my Common Ground program so you know a little bit more about it. But here's the 1-minute overview of what we're up to as disruptive innovators. So there you have it. Yeah, common ground, common ground. I was flying over the Rocky Mountains as I was building the Common Ground program, and I was uncertain what kind of logo to develop. And as I looked down at the, grand mountains, Rocky Mountains in the American West, I kept thinking to myself that there were all of these different peaks of the mountaintops, all different heights, grander mountains, smaller mountains. But what did they all have in common? The base of the mountain. And I said, that's the image that speaks to me. If we were to flip the mountains upside down, we'd all be level. We'd be standing on common ground. And so I've been pouring myself and my creativity and my passion into building a program that will help to make a difference in our effort to transform services to become more recovery-oriented. So Common Ground exists to safeguard human dignity by increasing empathy between us and bringing individual voice and choice to the center of the care team, to the center of the rehabilitation team, to the center of clinical services. That's why Common Ground exists. And the first step that I was actually in the process of creating when I first came to Israel back in the early 90s was the Hearing Distressing Voices simulation. I wanted to find a way to introduce people to what it's like to experience a psychiatric disability and to navigate through the world while having that experience. And I personally, as you know, was really familiar with what it's like to hear distressing voices. And way back before the digital age, I decided to create an analog tape and a recording studio of what it's like to hear distressing voices and to have people use a Sony Walkman to hear these voices. But importantly, I didn't stop there. The simulation, which is about a 3-hour workshop, also includes what we call workstations. So while listening to the simulation of distressing voices, people also have to get busy and do things. For instance, they have to go through a mental status exam, count backwards from 100 by 7, name the last 4 presidents of the United States. What is the date? What time is it? The same questions that they ask us when we go into an emergency room. People also have to go to the testing center while they're hearing distressing voices. And they have to try a reading comprehension test and answer the questions correctly, if they can. They also have to put together complex origami figures with paper, folding the paper, right? And as they're doing this, then they get asked, now it's time to go outside for a meaningful daytime activity. And so they have to go out and get change for a dollar bill, or they have to go out and ask a stranger as they're hearing voices for the bus schedule, okay? And my goal in doing this was creating an exercise that when people had passed through it, they would understand, oh my gosh, people diagnosed with mental illness are not weak and broken, they're strong. Even being exposed to the simulation for 45 minutes made me so exhausted. How do these people live with it day in and day out? I wanted an experience, a simulation, a training that would bypass the head and all the clinical knowledge and go to the heart of even the most seasoned and skilled mental health professionals. And so what I'd like to do with you is to take a few minutes here so you can watch an American news broadcaster on CNN named Anderson Cooper experience my simulation solo as he tries to do some of these tasks.
So I'm going to put these earphones in, and they're going to try to do a series of tests. Okay, so I'm now hearing sort of whispers and voices in my head, and the first test is on some number puzzles.
Listen, you suck, and they know it. Can't you get this right?
Okay, so I did this test for 3 minutes, and I did not get a single one. It's very hard to concentrate if it's like music or something constant, it's easy, but people talking to you is very difficult. So now I'm going to be asked a series of questions by our producer, Susan, and these are basically a series of questions that a person would be asked if they were being admitted to a hospital.
Can you tell me what day it is?
Yeah, it's Sunday, June, I don't know, what's the date, 7th?
So I'm going to say 5 numbers, and I want you to repeat them back to me after I'm done.
Okay.
5, 23, 67, 2, 76.
5, 23, 67, something 76.
Enough
I'm going to say 5 words. You don't have to repeat them, but just listen to them.
You'll be near.
Cat,
Near
book,
to me.
cigar,
I'll make it
damage,
okay.
and rain.
Make you okay.
Can you name the last 4 presidents of the United States?
Okay for you to be
Barack
here.
Obama, George
I'm
Bush,
Here. Here. Right here.
Bill
Near.
Clinton,
Here.
and George Bush.
Hear it? Hear
So
it
those
now?
5 words I said before, can you remember any of
Near
them?
and here. Hear it.
No. It's hard when, because sometimes the voices are like whispering, and sometimes they're
You're
aggressive,
okay
and
now.
sometimes they're kind of comforting. And
Hear the treat.
but again, with people kind of talking to you all the time,
It's okay.
it's hard.
Don't worry. Now or later.
So I'm
don't
gonna try to
worry.
make a boat
You
of
all right?
origami following these instructions.
Hey, it'll be okay. Near, near. Get near.
Shut up!
I want to talk back to the voices now, but it's really distracting. It's,
Do not do it. Do not touch that stuff. Eyes down. You suck! What are you looking at? This is easy. You want to touch that?
I can't do this.
Hand down. Keep your eyes down. Just do it, Stuart. Just do it. Just do it. Filthy mind. Leave it alone.
It's also frustrating because they're telling me I can't do it, and so I didn't do a very good job with the boat. But it's really hard to focus when kind of people are whispering to you and talking to you.
Just come clear. Come near to me. Come near for help.
Hey, do you have yesterday's paper? Yesterday's New York Times? No? Okay, I'll just get today's. It's incredibly distracting on the street to have somebody talking in your head, and it makes you feel completely isolated from everyone else around you, and you don't want to engage in conversation with other people. You kind of find yourself wanting to engage in conversation with the voice in your head because they're constantly being really negative and talking to you, and everything they're saying relates to things that you're actually doing. They're criticizing things you're doing. It's like it's like you have a chorus watching you and commenting on what you're doing, and you can't help it. I mean, I literally find myself wanting to kind of respond to them, kind of tell them to be quiet, and it's incredibly unpleasant. This is a very, very unpleasant experiment. It's really, it's eye-opening because it kind of really shows you what other people must be going through who deal with this on a regular basis. But also, like, I cannot wait to take these headphones off because it's really depressing. It's very negative. It makes you feel very, very negative. Yeah, it's very creepy. I want it to stop.
Eyes down. Back up. Stand up now. I'll count you off. I'll count 20, 30, 40. Stand up now. Walk away.
You're okay.
Walk now.
Pacify. Pacify. On to pacify. All the way to make it home.
This, of course, is a very powerful experience for people. And I often, hear people saying that the experience of the simulation has changed their entire approach and understanding to working with people. I've had psychiatrists who have been working and teaching and training psychiatry residents for many years say that they will never tell a psychiatric resident to just ignore people's preoccupation with voices. There's an old clinical myth that if you ask people about their voice-hearing experience, it will only reinforce their talking about voices. But the opposite is actually true. When we tell people not to talk about their voices or to silence them if they make an effort to speak about them, what we end up doing is leaving folks feeling very isolated and alone with what can be a difficult experience. So the value for me of this hearing voices simulation is that it helps to create this idea that those of us with a diagnosis who experience psychiatric symptoms are human beings just like Anderson Cooper is, right? When this aired on national TV some time ago in the United States, I got phone calls and emails and text messages from voice hearers all over the United States. And for them, it was a really powerful thing to see this famous news broadcaster unable to do an origami. And they said, yeah, if Anderson Cooper is struggling with this, no wonder I find it difficult sometimes too. There's been about 20 different research studies on the simulation, and the ones that focus on does the simulation help to increase measured empathy in participants, and the answer is yes, it does. To my surprise, the simulation, of course, we've redone it now, and it's all happening digitally on MP3 players, etc. But the thing, in its own little way, has gone viral. And let me show you the ways in which it's used in many places around the world. U.S. public police academies, and U.S. Marshals, first responders, like ambulance drivers and firefighters, judges, prison systems and probations use the simulation to train officers to have deeper empathy for inmates who may have a mental illness. Emergency medical technicians, crisis intervention teams that go out and work with people who are in crisis in the community. Pharmacy students use it. Nursing students use it in all disciplines of nursing. Medical students are using it even before they select a specialty in medicine. Of course, a large percentage of the mental health workforce use the simulation, and many family members and family organizations use the simulation in many English-speaking countries around the planet. And so the kind of things we hear, I have greater respect for what they go through and the courage it must take to get through each day. Thanks, Pat, for allowing me to understand what a person goes through on a daily basis. I don't have sympathy, I have empathy. I could not stop talking about it. I know how to better understand my patients. The simulation was very powerful. Now I understand why patients want to talk about their voices. So one of the things I'd like you to think about is, might the simulation, a Hebrew version of the simulation, work for Israel in some of the ways it's been working in the United States? Could this become a powerful teaching tool? Something to think about, and something that I would be very encouraged to work with you on. That's one facet. My idea is we need to establish the common ground of our shared humanity before anything else. So that's the first part of the Common Ground program. There's a second part. Now remember, Common Ground exists to safeguard human dignity by increasing empathy and bringing individual voice and choice to the center of the care team. And that's why I created Common Ground software also. Here's a map, a systems map, of what a standard med check visit, that's what we call them, medication check visit, that happens in a typical public sector mental health treatment program. We have medication clinics. People come in every month, every 6 months, every 3 months to see the psychiatrist, to see the prescribing nurse, right? And the typical way that this appointment unfolds, it typically lasts 15 minutes. That's not a whole lot of time, 15 minutes. So people check in, and then they wait, wait, in a waiting room with old magazines and nothing else to do. Then folks see the doctor, they answer some questions, a prescription is made, and people leave. Research has shown that between the time we go in a physician's office and the physician asks us, "So how are you doing today?" and when the physician begins to interrupt because they have to meet all of these tasks and ask all of these questions, we have 18 seconds. I'm not kidding you. 18 seconds to say how I'm doing. 18 seconds to describe the agony of unwanted effects. 18 seconds to express our concerns about how medicine may be affecting our health. Not much time. How might we think about disrupting this system and transforming it? You see, I think the key, in my experience, is we can lecture about recovery for a long time and not really make a significant difference. Yes, we can inspire people, but then people, clinicians, family members, we return to the same environments and we regress to the old way of doing things again. My theory is that in addition to giving inspiring talks, what would happen if we disrupt the system itself, right? If we disrupt the system itself and create tools that we put into the system in such a way that they're used every single day. What if we created tools that would teach recovery as they're being used? Think about that for a minute. So that's what I did. I created a new, or I like to call it, I re-engineered a care pathway. This is the pathway as it exists, right? Typically. And I said, we can do better. And so I've created what I call the common ground visit. And it starts at check-in. And in clinics using the common ground program, we completely throw out the waiting area. No more waiting. In today's healthcare environment, there's no time for waiting in waiting rooms. We need to get prepared to participate in making some of the most important decisions in our lives, and that is decisions about psychiatric medicines. The decisions we make in that 15-minute appointment are going to affect us for better or for worse for months to come. And I said, I need to disrupt that waiting room, get rid of it. And instead, what if we created a peer-run, these are paid peer supporters, a peer-run decision support center? And what if, when I check in to my appointment, instead of going to the waiting area, I arrive at a decision support center and I'm greeted by a person in recovery, right? A lot of stuff can happen in a decision support center. So people arrive at MedClinic a half an hour, 30 minutes prior to seeing the psychiatrist. And they meet with peer staff, people in recovery. Why did I choose this way to disrupt and re-engineer the system? Because nearly 100% of people receiving public mental health services will come at some point to MedClinic. And what that means is that 100% of people coming to MedClinic will get to meet peers in recovery. They don't need to listen to a lecture on recovery. They just meet a peer who themselves is working and in recovery. Talk about hope. Here's just a real quick video on a tour I did recently at some decision support centers in the United States. Over the course of 12 days, we visited 13 peer-run decision support centers in 13 mental health centers across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We drove over 1,008 miles on our journey. We traversed the state from remote rural areas through beautiful farmlands and Amish country, up winding roads into the Pocono and Allegheny Mountains. I learned that Common Ground is so much more than software. It's an entire program that promotes and integrates team-based care. No silos. Team-based care means no silos. Common Ground makes the voice and choice of the individual the epicenter around which all care efforts are coordinated. Of course, I also met remarkable, inspiring, heroic, innovative peer specialists. Peer specialists rock. They are the real disruptive innovators. They disrupt the myth of chronicity because they're living in recovery and share their lived experience with folks coming to the Decision Support Center, which, by the way, is pretty much everyone coming for services. And that means that nearly everyone coming for services gets to hear the good news that recovery is real. They are reaching tens of thousands of peers with the disruptive know-how to support healing, self-discovery, and recovery. I learned so much from you guys. Thank you. We sure were busy, and we got pretty tired during our 12-day road trip. But it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience that I'll never forget. I also personally want to thank each of you for opening up your hearts and your doors for us to visit and learn from you. Together, we are changing the world so that more people can recover after a diagnosis of mental illness. Thanks for all you do. All right. Peer-run Decision Support Center. What else happens there besides getting greeted a half hour before you see your psychiatrist, right? What else happens? What happens is that peer specialists are highly trained in helping people, everybody coming into clinic, discover their personal medicine. Imagine that. And not only do we help people discover their personal medicine, but their personal medicine, once it's discovered, is recorded and put into the computer program that I've developed, okay? What else happens? People can get personal medicine cards, as you see a Rolodex here for personal medicine cards. People can print them right out of the computer and the software program. The second thing that happens in a peer-run decision support center, besides peer support and a warm welcome, besides discovering personal medicine, is peers are assisted in developing what I call a power statement. A power statement is a highly structured, deliberately crafted, brief, 3-sentence statement that says how I want treatment to help me. A power statement, how I want treatment to help me. This is Mary. The most important thing in Mary's life is being a good mom to her baby. Being a good mother to her infant daughter is powerful personal medicine. Mary struggles with major depressive disorder with psychotic features, right? And she takes very high doses of both an antidepressant and an antipsychotic medication. And she hit a point where these medications were making her so sleepy, so somnolent, that she was sleeping through the baby's feedings at night. And the state was threatening to come in and take her baby to foster care because she couldn't care for her baby. Okay? Mary came to the Decision Support Center. Peer staff helped her craft a power statement for her doctor. And here was her power statement. The most important thing in my life is being a good mom to my baby. That's my personal medicine, and it helps me stay out of psychosis. I want you to work with me to find a medicine that will help me pay attention to my baby, not my voices, so I can be a good mom. Powerful power statement. Help to turn treatment around. Help the psychiatrist, the therapist, the case manager, and Mary get on the same page about what matters to Mary. I love power statements because power statements are an N of 1 study. Yes, it can be important that the PANS scale scores come down and the global assessment of functioning comes down and all of these various measures we use. But the ultimate measure of whether treatment is successful is whether or not Mary can care for this baby. That's the outcome that matters to Mary. A power statement does this in 3 ways. A power statement introduces me to my care team as a person, not a patient. It says how I want treatment to help me. And it invites my care team, it invites the clinicians and the rehab specialists to get on the same page with me to help me get to being a good mom who can care for that baby. That's a power statement. In decision support centers, peers support people in discovering their power statement, writing it, and that is entered into the computer program. The next thing that happens in a decision support center is what we call decision support. Decision support is simply an effort to give people important information so they can weigh the pros and cons of various decisions that they may be facing in their life. So within the Common Ground software and the program, there's an entire online recovery library, right? And the recovery library is filled with information that is completely recovery-oriented. And this information empowers peers. It empowers peers to be able to have a different kind of conversation with their prescriber. So here's someone who is going to, in a decision support center, who's going to tell us about her experience of getting information from our online library, because her concern is, I think I'm over-medicated. But she was afraid to speak up to her doctor, right? So she came in, peer specialists supported her, and she looked at this video and completed a worksheet and was able to hand it to her doctor. Here's what she says.
Hey guys, it's Pat דיגן. I'm here at Human Services, and we're going to talk to Krista, who recently used an important resource in Common Ground. Take it away, Krista.
Hi everybody, I'm Krista. I'm a certified peer specialist and I work at Human Services, Inc. I recently used the Are You Over-Medicated video and also the worksheet that comes along with it to speak to my doctor, because I'm a person in mental health recovery myself. And it was really helpful because the video talks about, reasons why you may be over-medicated. Do you feel tired? Do you feel kind of lethargic during the day? Things like that. And I was feeling that way. So I went in with my doctor after filling out the Are You Over-Medicated worksheet. And what I did was I checked, how many antipsychotics I'm on, how many antidepressants I'm on, how many mood stabilizers, and how many anti-anxiety medications I'm on. Basically, after talking to my doctor and giving him these worksheets, and he looked at these, he agreed with me, because I feel like, I had the voice and I was being assertive about talking to him, that, maybe I was over-medicated. So what he did was he reduced one of the medications I'm on, and that would be done slowly. And so that's working out well. And we talked about reducing another one once I get some blood work from my physical health doctor, just to make sure everything's okay before he reduced another one. So it was really helpful, and this is something that we can help with our peers that come in. And so it's just a great resource for people to use.
Thanks
so
Krista.
much.
Yep.
So again, decision support is a very respectful way of helping people arrive at their decisions and to be able to have a different kind of conversation with their psychiatric care provider and with their whole treatment team. Me and my team develop all of these library materials, and they're available at the decision support centers. So in addition to decision support, the fourth thing that happens in a decision support center is that peers support peers in completing a health report. A health report is an online survey that people use to describe how I've been doing since my last appointment. So I might answer questions about how my symptoms have been. Have I been using my personal medicine? How have any side effects been? How is my living situation? How is my health? Am I concerned about my blood pressure or my tobacco use? Am I interested in changing my tobacco use or quitting altogether? Those types of questions, pretty straightforward questions. And all of that information, my personal medicine and whether I've been using it, my power statement, my health status, all goes into the report and forwards into my care team, right? And then I'm ready to go into my appointment. I'm ready to go into my actual appointment. By the time I get into my appointment, my psychiatrist or my therapist or whomever already has the health report. And so the next step is to review the health report together and arrive at a shared decision about the next step in treatment. A shared decision represents what I will be doing, what my doctor and I, what my therapist and I have agreed to do between now and the next appointment. For instance, we agree that between now and my next appointment, I'll use the new medicine. I will also get off the bus 2 stops early and walk to my apartment. Exercise is an antidepressant and is powerful personal medicine. So that's the software program, and that shared decision prints out as a report, and I take it out into my life with me. Because recovery happens not in the office with the professionals. Recovery happens out there in the context of my own life. The report also forwards to the rest of my care team, no matter where they are. So it forwards out to my residential program, so that my residential support workers can see how I've been using my personal medicine, can see what matters to me in terms of my power statement, can see what my concerns are. It forwards to my therapist. It forwards to my case manager and anyone else I want to be sure to include on my care team. In terms of outcomes, what we find in studies of the Common Ground software program is that people using it are more engaged and more activated in their own self-care. That in one large health system in New Jersey, they're finding that it results in lower emergency room and inpatient admissions. People consistently rate that their communication with their psychiatric care provider improves through shared decision-making. That consumers' concerns about medications decrease. People are less concerned about side effects and less concerned about the impact of medicine on their physical health. Hopefully that's due to the shared decision-making process with more acceptable outcomes for people. Also, people have an increase in belief that the medicine's actually helping me. People show an improved satisfaction with care across the board. And in one study out of New York recently published in the journals, increased medication adherence among people diagnosed with schizophrenia. Now, Common Ground has been picked up in about 70 mental health centers, assertive community treatment teams, etc., in various states around my country. But you'll notice that not everybody is using it. That becomes a really interesting question. I believe it is a superior method. We have data to support its efficacy. It doesn't cost much money. It does cause for committed, principled leadership in an organization. and it requires the willingness to not just start the service, but like any new practice, sustain it over time. And that's the hard part about initiating new and innovative ideas, right? There is a tendency kind of to drift back. And so what an organization has to do to not just make a change, but they also need to sustain it and then spread it. I'm proud to say that we have multiple organizations across the United States that are successfully sustaining and spreading the practice of using a peer-run decision support center in conjunction with the software program. However, not everybody has adopted it. And what I've come to conclude from that is not everybody's ready. Not every organization is ready for what one person called, and I think accurately, it's a heavy lift. It's very disruptive, this Common Ground software program. And so what we did strategically is rather than give up or say, oh, we'll never get really, really big, we decided to break the Common Ground program down into what we call smaller bites. Smaller pieces that help organizations get started and grow towards the fully operationalized program. So I want to tell you a little bit about that strategy and how we broke that out. As you recall, the 4 foundational elements of my Common Ground program, in addition to empathy and the simulation, are personal medicine, the use of power statements, decision support, supporting people in making their choices, and shared decision making, okay? So, one of the ways we built this out is in the Common Ground library. How can people make decisions unless they're getting good recovery-oriented information, right? So in the Common Ground library, myself and my team create recovery-oriented information. This is the homepage this month in our recovery library. And as you can see, there are all kinds of learning tracks in the library. If you want to learn to manage physical health appointments, particularly if you have a trauma history and seeing your primary care doctor is triggering, you can try our learning track on that topic. And that will support you in making the decision about whether or not to go to the dentist and how to manage the fear around that, or to go to your primary care. So recoverylibrary.com is out there and is a great tool. And I wanted to share with you just a sample of the kinds of recovery-oriented material that's in my recovery library. So this is just all the videos in the library are rather brief, but this is a sample of just one.
When I talk about my recovery from schizophrenia, people sometimes tell me that I must have a lot of courage. However, if I'm honest, I would have to say I never felt particularly courageous during my recovery. Mostly, I felt determined, afraid, and uncertain. I felt determined to get well, afraid I couldn't do it, and uncertain about how to get the life I wanted for myself. I was not a courageous hero. I was scared and vulnerable, but I continued, on most days, to put one foot in front of the other on the long walk of my recovery. It seems to me that courage is an attribute we ascribe or assign to a person who remains determined in the face of fear, uncertainty, and adversity. For instance, when we watch news footage of a pilot landing a plane safely in the icy Hudson River, we say the pilot is courageous. When we see a firefighter scaling a ladder to rescue a person from a burning building, we say, isn't she courageous? But is courage really what the pilot or firefighter experiences? The pilot is in a cold sweat, hands trembling and fear gripping his throat as he lands the plane in the water. The firefighter climbs the ladder despite her trembling knees, pounding heart, and uncertainty as to whether she'll survive the ordeal. And that's my point. What outsiders call courage is experienced as determined effort in the face of fear and uncertainty by the person living the experience. On a practical level, this means we don't need to feel like a hero with lots of courage in order to recover. If we are fearful and uncertain, if we sometimes doubt we can achieve our goals as expressed in our power statement, for instance, it's okay. The pilot and the firefighter feel afraid and uncertain too. What we really need to walk our journey of recovery is determined effort despite the fear and the uncertainty. We need to put one foot in front of the other, even if we're afraid. Over time, those trembling steps add up to the life that we want for ourselves. This is Pat Deegan. Thanks for listening.
So imagine an online library filled with these kinds of tools, right? So peer specialists and therapists and residential workers are trained to know that if a person is feeling afraid and trepidatious about moving out of a group home into their own apartment, and they're saying, I just don't have the courage to do that yet, maybe the person could be supported by watching the video together, discussing it, and realizing that even people who look courageous are scared, right? Very powerful stuff. So the library is filled, and just want to say on the side that the beauty about living in 2019 is I can create all of these right at my desktop in my home. I'm not going into a recording studio or anything like that. We can create this extraordinary content right in our own homes. A few other examples of how we broke the whole program down into smaller bites in order to gain greater uptake, easier uptake by the system. We broke down the whole idea of personal medicine and into personal medicine cards and personal medicine guides. And so currently we offer 10 different personal medicine guides that you can, there's self-paced guides, they're like a workbook, where you can explore anything, any challenge you may be facing. So maybe you're struggling with grief and grieving. Maybe you're struggling with anxiety, or false beliefs, or voices, or sleep, right? Common challenges on the road to recovery. We have guides to guide people in discovering their personal medicine and using personal medicine cards to empower themselves to pass through these challenges. We took it a next step. We took it out another step. And we are using our online learning platform to invite people to become certified personal medicine coaches. And I'm pleased to say that Israel has its own, from the very second class of certified personal medicine coaches, your own personal medicine coach here in the audience. And could you just stand up for a moment, Shakar? Yeah? This lady right here, let's hear it for her. She is Israel's first certified personal medicine coach, and she didn't even have to get on an airplane and come over to be trained, because what we're doing, we're training people from South Korea, from Australia, from Italy, from Ireland, from Israel, from England, and we're training folks all online. And in a period of about 8 weeks. And so we're thrilled to be launching personal medicine coaches who can carry this new technology and this new way of doing recovery-oriented services. And so in closing here, before we get into questions and answers, I would just like to say that I've been doing my part over these years to try to close the gap between what is and what should be. I got hurt in a system, and I needed help. And I devoted myself to changing, to transforming, to disrupting a system so that no one ever got hurt in this system again, right? And I saw it as my mission, as my vocation, to close the gap between not being heard and finding common ground. So I think all of us in this room are leaders. And in my opinion, leadership is not a title or a position. Leadership is a way of behaving. It's an action. A leader is one who sees what is and can imagine what should be. Think of something for a minute that you see in terms of mental health and rehabilitation. What do you see that is, and how could it be better? What could take its place? Some people see what is and think about what should be and realize there's a great gap. But they faint. They can't imagine how to close that gap, right? I had an idea, common ground, about how to close that gap. I imagined something different. And we're starting to do some of that. So I ask you, what's the gap you see? What's the gap between what is here in Israel today and what should be, the way you want it to be? What's your vision? That's what it means to lead, is to be able to articulate your vision of how to close the gap. Not only in terms of what you can do, but also thinking about what kinds of tools can you create right here in Israel to help close the gaps that you perceive. I firmly believe that although recovery education and recovery writing is important, it's not enough. That people need concrete tools to use at work every day that change how they practice their profession. When a doctor sits day in and day out and day in and day out in a Common Ground program clinic, and every single person coming into the office has a paper health report with a power statement and personal medicine, guess what starts to change? The way psychiatrists practice. I walk into Common Ground program clinics, and there are signs on the psychiatrist's door. Don't forget to use your personal medicine. Yes, that's good stuff. So, what is that you're unhappy with? What should be here in Israel? And how do we close that gap? What tools can you create? I said, a simulation, personal medicine, power statements, yes. Yes, all these tools, yes. Recovery library, yeah. Closing the gap. Because I wanted to disrupt not just what professionals do, I want to disrupt and transform what we, the patients, we, the service users, do. Some service users do not like me. They're like, Pat, before we got this dumb old Common Ground thing, I used to be able to stand outside the clinic and smoke before my appointment. Now I have to go in there. It's like, yep. I'm helping disrupt this notion that you get to sit around waiting to get fixed. It doesn't work that way. You're not a broken object who needs to be fixed and the doctor can't fix you, but together, you can move down that path of recovery to what matters to you. So yes, change can be uncomfortable, but onward. So in our question and answer period, feel free to raise any topic that you'd like. Feel free to disagree with me. Feel free to teach me something. And also feel free to tell me what your vision is of some of the gaps here in Israel between what is and what should be, and what ideas, what tools can you create that can be used every day in work, at work, right? Every service day that will change how it is we do business and help to close that gap. So on that note, I know we've got microphones coming around, and feel free, I got to get the headset if someone wants to speak in Hebrew.
Okay.
Yeah?
Somebody here who was asking how the patient, the person, can impact on the system if the system is setting all the rules?
Right. So I think that there are times when we really can feel powerless in relation to a system, and where we feel like perhaps we're not being heard our point of view, or that we feel like the system has all of the power and makes all of the rules. And that sometimes when we feel helpless and powerless in that way, we can feel very angry and alienated from the system of care. And I think in those situations, it's critically important to connect with other peers and other people using the system who share our experience of not being listened to and not having a voice and a choice with regards to governance and the rules governing care. It's important in those situations to get involved in boards of directors, on advisory boards, in helping to determine policy. And frankly, the larger our numbers, the stronger our voice will be. A friend of mine told me a story about that. He said, if you're fighting a war all by yourself and casualties are high on your side, game over, right? But if we can join together and making our voice louder and stronger, then I think we can have a say at the table. I remember my good friend Judy Chamberlain. Many of you will remember Judy as an activist from the early days of our movement. And Judy put it nicely, I think, when she said, you know, in the early days, when we couldn't sit down at the table, when we weren't invited in the room to help make the rules, we had to stand outside of the health ministry's building, shouting and using microphones. But eventually, we got invited into the room, invited to sit down at the table, and then we can use our indoor voice and be able to participate in rulemaking. Now, on our part, this can be quite challenging sometimes because we experience the immediacy of our need. We need the rules to change right now because they're affecting me. And that can be really hard to navigate, right? And so one of the things I think that systems need to do is to keep in mind, and by systems I mean policy systems, rulemaking systems, the systems that broker power that way, is to remember that it's critically important to invite, when looking for the service user voice, the service user perspective, to invite representatives from the full spectrum of service user groups and organizations, right? There is a tendency to hand-pick people whose views are similar with that of the rulemaking body or the policy body. But I believe that in a democratic society, what's very important is to invite the full spectrum, the full diversity of opinions and approaches. Because in and through that diversity, I think we find creative ideas and strengths. And we also need to invest, as the policy and governmental organizations that create rules, to know that the best rules will be the ones on which we have included service users in the development of those rules. But that doesn't happen naturally. We need to support service users in becoming effective advocates and developing those leadership skills, right? I was talking to someone yesterday about the importance of remembering that if we're going to ask people to come to a meeting in the middle of the day, and all of the professionals at that policy meeting are on payroll, and I'm showing up as a volunteer for no pay, that's inequitable. If we're going to have a meeting and none of us are going to get paid, let's have it after work hours, right? So we need to think about leadership development, how to support people in becoming effective self-advocates, and how to be more equitable in sharing power. One other thought on this that I use a lot, because I stay active in the disability rights movement myself, is that some issues it feels like it can't wait. They're too urgent. They're too of such utmost importance. And those are the times that I join my comrades and peers out in the field at protest, at demonstrations, at creating alternatives, at creating our own solutions when nothing else seems to be working. So keeping an active foot in activism and working within the system is how I navigate that urgency we can feel about needing policy change now.
קודם כל, וואו, דוקטור פטרישיה יקרה, יש לי כל כך הרבה שאלות. אני כאימא לילדה מתמודדת שהיא אומרת שהתרופות שלה לקחו לה את האור, שהתרופות לקחו לה את ניצוץ החיים, שהתרופות עשו לה שריטה לא רק במוח, גם בלב, ובכל זאת היא קמה כל יום עם ההתמודדות הזאת. דיברת על אומץ, מבחינתי היא אמיצה גדולה מאוד. ובעקבות ההתמודדות עם המחלה של הבת שלי, אני עובדת עם משפחות שיש בביתם מתמודדי נפש. והשאלה שלי היא איך מגיעים לסרבני טיפול. אני אקרא להם מאתגרי טיפול. והחלק השני של השאלה, איך, מה היית מציעה למשפחות למתמודדי וסרבני טיפול? תודה.
Yes. So I think that that's one of the toughest situations that we have, and there are no easy answers. We know that for many people, treatment can be effective, but also for many people, treatment comes with unwanted effects and various risks, some of which may be unacceptable. What do we do when someone says, I don't want treatment? What I try to do in those situations, and again, there's no magical answer here. A lot of people, when we're working in the first episode psychosis area with young people experiencing psychosis, early psychosis, is we begin by asking them, what do you want to be doing with your life? What matters to you? I want to be a rapper. I want to write my own lyrics. I want to be a parent. I want to... asking that question, what do you want to do? So I was saying, getting in touch with a young person and asking what it is that you want to do with your life, what's important to you, what matters to you. And then framing a variety of ways to help a person or support a person in getting there. And we have tremendous success in engaging very difficult to engage people. Once we start from the premise that you're sick and you need treatment, you're broken and need to be fixed, we lose people real fast. The idea is to ask them what matters to you and how are we going to get you there. Another thing I think that's extremely important is helping people discover their own unique personal motivation for engaging in treatment. So one of the things that I've done in my recovery library, we have a worksheet that's called My Personal Reason for treatment and my personal motivation for treatment. And people identify, you know, what are your challenges interfering with doing? Oh, I can't play soccer when I'm, you know, working for the FBI and watching cars and patterns and, you know, I can't play soccer I used to be good at soccer. I can't do it when that's happening. Okay. How could we help if that's getting in the way, if your disordered thinking or whatever we want to call it, your false beliefs, or if the FBI monitoring you is getting in the way of your engaging in your soccer, which you really love, you know, how can you use that to help motivate you to get back to playing soccer? So again, we get the focus off of what's the matter with you and get it on to how are we going to get you to what matters to you. It's the only thing I've ever found that really works, to engage people. And I guess like my grandmother could have asked the same question about me. How are we ever going to get Pat? Well, how are we ever going to get her to do more than sitting like a lump smoking cigarettes, you know? And I think the wisdom from my grandmother is to continue to offer people opportunities. And if they say no once, that's fine. Ask the next day and the next day. So many people give up after the first no. And I'm so grateful my grandmother didn't give up on me. She didn't nag me, she didn't harass me, but she did come in every single day and invite me to live a different way. And it started by grocery shopping. So don't give up. Yeah.
והשאלה שלי היא כזאת, אני כאילו נמצא בכל מיני חוגים, דברים כאלה, קשה לי כאילו להתמיד, ואני מרגיש כאילו שגם קשה לי כאילו להתחבר עם אנשים שבלי שום קשר, אם יודעים שאני חולה או לא חולה, קשה לי לתקשר עם אנשים. שאלה כאילו, איך להתגבר על זה, איך להתמודד.
Do you want to talk to people? You do want to talk to people.
אני מדבר עם אנשים, אבל שאם אני נמצא בחוג. אני רוצה, כאילו אם אני נמצא בחוגים, כל מיני כאלה, קשה לי כאילו לתקשר עם אנשים.
So do you meet after activities with people? So I would agree that meeting people is really hard. If you can believe it, I'm very shy. And I'm going to go to dinner this evening with a group of people, and I'm more scared of going to dinner with a group of people than I am standing up here. So I think you and I have a lot in common. Okay? In the olden days, people like me and you used to live in monasteries out in the desert. Anyway.
פטרישיה, באמת רציתי להגיד לך תודה, תודה רבה בשם עצמי וגם בשם מתמודדים אחרים על זה שאת מהווה לנו השראה. אני למעשה עד שלא שמעתי עלייך והכרתי אותך, לא אישית, לא ידעתי שיש אפשרות כזאת למתמודדים בכלל, ללמוד בכלל תואר ראשון, תואר שני, ומישהי שהיא בכלל הייתה מישהי כמוך, זה מהווה השראה עצומה. וזה נתן לי המון כוח ללימודים ולהתקדמות ובכלל. ורציתי רגע גם להציג את הצד הזה, לא רק הצד של המקצועי והצד של אנשי המקצוע. ומבחינתי אני גם בעצם הולכת בהשראתך. החלטתי ללכת ללמוד ולתת בעצם את הידע שלי מניסיון. ואין לי שאלה, רק רציתי באמת להגיד תודה רבה.
שלום, תודה. שמי נוגה, ואני באה משני המקומות. אני גם מתמודדת, ואני גם עובדת בחברה שתומכת במתמודדים. אחרי שאושפזתי, הבנתי שבעצם זה מה שאני הולכת לעשות כל חיי, לא חשוב מה עשיתי קודם. אני מאוד מזדהה בקטע הזה עם העניין של עשיתי טרנספורמיישן. זאת אומרת, יש עכשיו נוגה אחת פה ונוגה אחת פה. לזו אני צריכה ללמוד לסלוח, ועם זו אני צריכה לחיות מחדש. זה דבר ראשון. מה שראיתי בתוך המערכת, עכשיו זו עכשיו אני עוברת לתפקיד שאני עושה, אני מלווה אנשים בתחום התעסוקה, ומלמדת אותם כישורי תעסוקה כדי לצאת מהבית, כמו שאנחנו יודעות, כי זה הדבר הראשון שצריך לעשות.
Yes.
Yes. במערכת קיימים המון גורמים שמטפלים באיש אחד. החל מהפסיכיאטר, דרך כל מערכות הליווי שאצלנו נקראות סל שיקום. לא תמיד יש תאום בין כולם, וזה אחד הדברים שמעכבים. אני בשאיפה שלי הייתי רוצה לראות יותר שיתוף פעולה, יותר עשייה משותפת למען הצרכים של האחד הזה, לא הצרכים של המערכת. זה דבר ראשון. דבר שני, אני מלווה אנשים אל הפסיכיאטר שלהם. הם מפחדים פחד מוות. הם לוקחים כדורים המון שנים. הם לא יודעים מה הם לוקחים. הם לא יודעים מה זה עושה להם. כשאני מנסה לפתוח את זה איתם, הם מפחדים להביא את זה לרופא, כי הוא יפגע בהם, הוא יתנקם בהם, הוא יעשה להם משהו. כשאני באה איתם לרופא, ואני מדברת עם הרופא, ואני פותחת את הדברים, זה נעשה אחרת. לא כל הרופאים משתפים פעולה, אבל יש היום חבר'ה צעירים שבהחלט מוכנים לנהל שיח עם המטופל על הדרך שהוא לוקח את התרופות שלו, מה הן, מה זה עושה, ולמה בכלל הוא צריך תרופות. וגם להסביר לו קצת על המחלה. לא להשאיר סכיזופרניה כתובה על הקיר, ובזה זה נגמר. דבר שלישי ואחרון, סליחה, עוד משהו שמציג. איפה הקשר עם המשפחות? את מספרת על עצמך, את מספרת שעשית דרך מאוד מיוחדת. איפה הייתה המשפחה שלך? איך זה היה ביחד? ואצלנו יש קושי, כי אני למשל מלווה אנשים, אבל אני לא בקשר עם המשפחות שלהם. והנה הגאפ, הנה הפער. הם יודעים דבר אחד, אני יודעת דבר אחר, גורם אחר יודע דבר אחר, ומה עושה אותו מתמודד באמצע? תודה רבה לך, מאוד שבאת.
Thank you for your comments. You know, on your first point, just a quick comment here, is one of the ideas that came up in the workshop we did yesterday was what about a peer-run decision support center before people attend Service Basket to make very important decisions about what care they want to engage in? Just a thought. Yeah, well, families are critically, I mean, I, told the story of my grandmother. Family is, she lived, with my family, and families can be wonderful allies and supports in recovery. And I think that, it is important to have communication between families and the care team, the rehab team, and the individual. I think that sometimes it can become very awkward and difficult if my goals as an adult are different than the goals my family have for me. And I am a believer that my goals as an autonomous adult rule over my family's goals for me. That said, I don't think silencing anyone in a decision-making process is a smart idea. For instance, one thing that we've done is develop a version of the Common Ground software for parents who are raising children who are using psychiatric medications. And the parents are invited to use the software and give their view of what's happening, just like the child is invited to give their view. And together they sit down with the psychiatrist and discuss the issues as both parties see them. But I think things are a little different when we talk about adults. That said, I think families can be wonderful allies and that they have an important point of view. So, and they're great advocates too. I mean, they're huge advocates. So.
אנחנו מלמעלה, אני שואלת בעברית. כן, לפני מספר חודשים יצא מאמר של מריאן פרקש, אם אני לא טועה בשם, לגבי הנושא של שימוש בהחלמה כמשהו הרבה יותר רחב מאשר רק בריאות הנפש, משהו שכבר משפיע גם על מדיניות ותקציבים, ברמה של פגיעה בתקציבים לבריאות הנפש, ומעניין אותי לשמוע מה דעתך על זה.
Well, it's interesting. I know Marianne Farkas very well out of Boston University. In fact, I'll be seeing her in January, and I unfortunately have not read that particular article about healing. But I think the notion of healing is a very rich one, and I could imagine, I mean, what a lot of people have pointed out is that once we began talking about individuals' own personal recovery, we began talking about systems and policies also having to recover, having to mend themselves, having to heal themselves in order to be more in tune with what people's needs are and how best to serve them. So for me, the metaphor of healing works very well for systems, for mental health systems, for policy. So I would agree with Marianne if that was her point.
תודה. שאלה אחרונה, ואני אחת המעריצות שלך. אני הצטרפתי לאחרונה לעמותה נהדרת ונפלאה שעושה הרבה למען נפגעי נפש שקוראים לה עוצמה, ויש לי הזכות להצטרף ולתרום את חלקי בכל מה שדרש. אני רוצה רק להזכיר שאני אימא של בן מתמודד, שהוא עורך דין במקצועו, הוא למד פה באוניברסיטת תל אביב, הוא היה מצטיין דיקן, ולצערנו הוא חלה במחלה, הוא עשה תפנית מאוד משמעותית בחיים והוא חזר בתשובה, כרגע לא עובד במקצוע, כן ניסינו בהתקף האחרון שלו, הוא חולה ביפולרי, לקחת אותו למסגרת שבהתקף לפחות תשמור על המצב מבלי שנצטרך לאשפז אותו, ואחרי 3 ימים לצערנו הרב הוצא אשפוז כפוי. אני לא רוצה לציין את השם של המקום כי זה מקום שבאמת נמצא בחיתוליו וסביר מאוד להניח שזה נעשה בטעות. הטראומה והזעזוע ממקום שהורה חושב שהוא הכי טוב לדבר הכי יקר לו להיות במקום טיפולי עד שההתקף יישכח מבלי שיצטרכו לקשור אותו ולעבור את כל החוויות המזעזעות שיש בבתי חולים פסיכיאטריים. לצערנו זה לא קרה, והשאלה שלי היא איך לדעתך צריך באמת להתמודד עם מצב שרופאים פסיכיאטרים באשר הם ייתנו את הדעת לעובדה שהיקר שלהם נמצא בידיים שלהם, ועל אף העובדה שמדובר באדלט שיש לו זכויות במצבים של פסיכוזה, מותר להורה להיות מעודכן במצב של הילד ולא למדר את ההורה, כי ברגע שממדרים את ההורה נוצר פער, ואנחנו מדברים על הפער הזה כרגע בהקשר אחר, אבל הוא פער מאוד מאוד אקוטי במקרה של התקפים. אם ממדרים את ההורה בכל מה שקשור לחולה שנמצא במצב אקוטי, במצב של התקף, ישנה בעיה שמחליטים בשביל ההורה ובשביל הבוגר בעצם להתאשפז, מה שבעצם חיפשנו אלטרנטיבה אחרת. זו גם הסיבה שהגענו למקום כזה.
Well, thank you for sharing. I think you are among many family members who've had the excruciating experience that you're describing. It is a gap. It is help that hurts. I don't have any easy answers because having our civil rights is important, and having the privilege of speaking privately with my care team as an adult is a very important right, and being able to choose who knows about my health information and who doesn't is a very important right to safeguard. At the same time, as family members, because we love our loved one, it's very important to know what's going on and to have information. And I think that this is a classic situation. It happens all the time in the United States as well. It can be infuriating and can cause real problems. And my heart goes out to you, and I don't know the answer of how to protect both sets of love and rights. I don't know the easy answer to that. But I'm thrilled to hear that you're part of an advocacy organization that's full of power. Your voice, your passion came through loud and clear. Thank you. And continue to take it and make people aware of your experience and paint that vision of how you want to close the gap. Because it's not easy to close that gap between individual rights and the rights of a family. That's very hard. I don't know how to do it. But perhaps you will figure it out. Yes? Good.
תודה רבה.